Hello everybody and welcome to the second episode of Sound Surfing with your host, Samuel Seed. In today's episode, we're going to be covering an album I have just recently discovered by a band I just recently discovered, Goths, by the Mountain Goats. Goths released on May 19th, 2017. It is the 16th album by singer-songwriter Josh Darnielle's musical project, the Mountain Goats. Goths was a big departure for Darnielle as no guitars were used on the album, an instrument that usually played center stage on previous records. It did, however, continue the jazz instrumentation from the two last albums, Beat the Champ and Transcendental Youth. The album itself is a nostalgic ode to goth culture and music that was really popular in the late 80s and early 90s. The sound itself isn't gothic, but rather a mixture of jazz, rock, and folk. Now let's hit the waves and cover Goths, song by song. Rain in Soho. Rain in Soho is a bit of a red herring, as it's the only song on the album with a true gothic sound, with a thumping beat and a brooding choir. It's a really cool sound that shows how cheeky and fun this album is gonna be. Andrew Eldritch is moving back to Leeds. Andrew Eldritch is a really sweet sounding tune that is a huge contrast with Rain in Soho. And it's definitely more like the general sound on the album. It's a classic sounding Mountain Goats song with great storytelling, although this kind of song will be done better later on in the album. It's still a great track. The Grey King and the Silver Flame Attunement. This one is a very low-key song with a great chorus. I love the way Darnell's breathy voice as he sings, "I'm hardcore, but I'm not that hardcore." It also leads into my favorite song off the album, We Do It Different on the West Coast. I really love this track. A song about the spread of goth culture around the world. It starts with a very Broadway-like intro, with single notes accompanying Darnielle's really unique and specific lyrics. The chorus also has some really gentle backing vocals that feels like such a warm blanket, which I think really is a great microcosm of the album. Warm. Unicorn Tolerance. Unicorn Tolerance sounds exactly like an early 2000s indie rock hit trying to be dark and brooding, but still having an affinity for the lighter things, like unicorns. It's a really fun track with one of the more sing-along choruses. Stench of the Unburied. Stench of the Unburied encapsulates nostalgia. It transports the listener to the warm summer day and goth music playing on the radio, something that Darnielle sings about in the track. The track continues the great storytelling on the album. Wear Black. Wear Black has some of my favorite jazz instrumentation on the album, along with great lyrics about forever keeping up the goth image, even to your own intervention. It's cheeky and jazzy and another great addition to the album. Paid in Cocaine. Paid in Cocaine is an ode to Long Beach, flaws and all. It carries the nostalgia from Stench of the Unburied with great horns. I don't think it does enough to separate itself from most of the sound off the album, but I still enjoy it. Rage of Travers. Rage of Travers is funky with a great low-key riff guiding the track. I also really love the horns on the track. They remind me of the manic horns from David Bowie's Black Star. Besides that, there isn't too much to speak of otherwise. For me, this is probably the worst track off the album. Shelved. Shelved has a great climactic outro, with some maximalist production. It also has some, probably my favorite lyrics on the album, telling about an aged goth star from the 80s struggling to gain traction in the 90s. Darnielle's half-talking, half-singing style really shines on Shelved. For the Portuguese goth metal bands. For the Portuguese goth metal bands, slightly brings back some of the gothness from Rain in Soho, but still retaining the gentleness from everything else. It's a really melancholic song where the nostalgia is a little more downbeat. Many of the fans don't really like this one, but I find it to be really underrated. Abandoned Flesh. Goths ends with another ode. An ode to forgotten goth band Gene Loves Jezebel. This one has some of my favorite storytelling on the album, and ends with one of my favorite lines on the album with, "Because the world would never know or understand the suffocated splendor of the once and future goth band." It ends with a really sweet jazzy outro that not only brings a close to the album, but a close to one of my favorite tracks off the album. So that's Goths, an album filled to the brim with nostalgia and warmth, which can make anyone long for such an obscure time, even if you weren't around for it. I recommend you give We Do It Different on the West Coast, Shelved, and Abandoned Flesh a listen, and see if black eyeliner and bleached hair is your style. And if it is, give Goths a listen. Thanks for riding the tide with me. Goodbye.